It's no secret that the editing of a project can span much longer than the time it takes to shoot it. What's less well known are the variables that affect that amount of time, and by the same token, the cost. After giving it some solid thought, we've identified 3 main categories of variables that can drive a project's post-production time and budget up or down: scope, style, and turnaround. Within each of those are a range of considerations. So without further ado, let's dive in. First up, scope, which includes 5 variables: range of services, asset sourcing, template versus custom graphics, revision rounds, and deliverables. Let's quickly go through each. Range of services. Did you know that post-production involves more than just editing? Understanding the full range and nature of the services your project needs is the first step in creating an accurate budget and timeline. At Arcais Creative, our post-production services are broken down into 6 core offerings: consultation, creative editing, visual effects, motion graphics, color grading, and audio mixing. We won't go into each of these in detail in this video, but just know that a project can include all or just a specific collection of these services depending on its unique needs. Asset sourcing. Nearly every project utilizes media other than captured footage and audio. Sourcing and approving elements like music, stock footage, voiceover artists, and graphics templates takes time. An agency providing all of these assets to an editor should bring their overall time and cost of a project down. However, a post-production team can also source songs, stock footage, and voiceover artist options for the agency's consideration. At least we do. One thing to keep in mind is that sourced assets will likely have their own licensing fees as well. Template versus custom graphics. When used appropriately, motion graphics can add a unique touch and elevate the professionalism of a video. But did you know that there are libraries full of pre-made templates that often give an editor a head start? By starting with a template, incorporating motion graphics into your next project may not be as out of reach as you may have thought. However, depending on a project's needs, client's requests, or the overall vision, a template may not be the best solution. In those instances, custom-created motion graphics are a better option, although they'll be at a higher rate than working with a template. As I mentioned with asset sourcing before this, a template graphic will still have a licensing fee in order to download and modify it. Revision rounds. Collaborative video creation typically involves some back and forth between the involved parties. The production crew, agency, end client, and post-production team are the most common players and stakeholders. With post-production, we generally recommend 4 revision rounds, 2 to the agency and 2 to the end client. If more revision rounds are needed beyond the original scope, expect that a higher fee will accompany that. As we'll see in the style portion of this video, setting a post-production team up for success at the beginning of a project is the best method of avoiding added revision rounds and their associated costs. On the flip side, reducing the number of revision rounds or eliminating them entirely can lower the budget and expedite the timeline. In our partnerships, we always provide all the working files and any assets that have been added along the way. So if an agency has editing skill sets in-house, they can reopen the project and pick up where we left off. Deliverables. These days, a project often includes more than just a single deliverable. With more video content being consumed on phones and computers alike, the need for shorter cut downs or vertical versions has become pretty common. While each alternate variation may take less time than the original, it still requires some amount of time and therefore a budget. The type and number of deliverables a project has is an important detail to consider when building out a post-production budget. Style. All right, that covers it as far as the main scope variables that drive a project's budget and timeline. Next up is style, which includes 5 variables of its own: level of guidance, narrative type, visual style, total amount of raw footage, and runtime length. Level of guidance. Although you wouldn't necessarily think it, unlimited creative freedom can often be daunting for a creative team, and post-production is no different. The art of video creation is highly subjective, and what may feel right to the editor could unknowingly be counterproductive to the end client's goal for a video. The quickest and most cost-effective solution is clear and thorough communication at the very start of a project. Sharing storyboards, scripts, inspiration pieces, and hopping on a good old-fashioned kickoff call are helpful resources to set an editing team in the right direction from the get-go. Of course, if it isn't possible to provide that level of guidance at the start of a project, it's always possible to work through stylistic changes during revision rounds. But you may just need to brace for longer turnaround and a higher overall budget to account for the time it'll take to reach a successful end product. Narrative type. If a project includes spoken word as the story foundation, there are a few forms this can take. The quickest and most cost-effective iteration is a pre-recorded, scripted voiceover. This is the most efficient to work with in post-production as it naturally creates a video structure with minimal cutting. Plus, there are a few AI-based options gaining popularity right now, like Descript or 11 Labs, that make this even more affordable. The mid-range option for narrative type is a speaker delivering lines on camera using a teleprompter. With this narrative type, the bulk of the work is centered around avoiding the speaker's mistakes and stitching together their best takes. Now, the most time and cost-intensive narrative is one created from unscripted interviews. With these projects, listening carefully through each interview, testing out different variations in soundbite ordering and delivery, and carefully weaving together disparate pieces ensures the most accurate messaging possible. Of course, the rub is that unscripted interviews are the most effective in terms of persuading an audience's emotional buy-in, a key component to many videos' effectiveness. To help save costs on projects with unscripted interviews, we've developed a workflow where the agency or client helps to pick the sound bites by using our favorite video review platform, Frame.io. Visual style. Regardless if a video has a spoken narrative, it certainly has a visual one. There's an unending number of editing techniques and effects that can be employed on a project, only limited by your imagination and budget. Brand videos and social posts will often incorporate trending visual styles like rapid-fire glitch cutting, time manipulation, picture-in-picture, overlays, or advanced transitions, to name a few. However, classic straight cuts between shots still reign king as the most effective form of editing. If it fits the style of your video, leaning on more timeless conventional editing techniques can result in quicker and more cost-effective completion, avoiding unnecessary bells and whistles. Total amount of raw footage. Now, this one may seem straightforward. The more raw footage provided on a project, the longer it takes an editor to ingest and work through it, right? Well, for the most part, yes, but there's a can of worms waiting to be uncovered here. It is true, including a ton of raw footage will take a long time to sort through, and most of it will end up on the cutting room floor, which could provide upsell opportunities to the end client, but that's a different video. However, if you provide your editor with too little footage, you're likely facing added costs for sourcing and licensing stock footage or motion graphics to fill out the video's final runtime. So in a vacuum, yes, less raw footage means less processing time and cost devoted to the intake phase. But zoom out to the overall project, and the cost savings may very well end up evening out elsewhere. Ultimately, the perfect ratio between raw footage and final video runtime arguably can't be perfectly defined. But if you've got a lot of raw footage and most of it is unscripted interviews, you're looking at a pretty hefty price tag, unless you're willing to hop in and help select sound bites. Runtime length. Generally, longer runtime videos cost more than shorter ones. This is an important element to consider when combined with other variables such as narrative style, visual style, and turnaround. The longer and intricate narrative and visually dynamic style need to be maintained throughout a video, the more expensive it'll be. If the video is due quickly or on short notice, that's going to impact the budget quite a bit as well. Speaking of a project being due and on short notice, let's move on to our third and final set of variables, those related to turnaround. Time allotments are essential when it comes to properly planning for and executing projects. Looping your editing team into a project as early as possible can help minimize expedited fees or avoid the dreaded "sorry, we're busy" email. Here are the 4 last variables we'll be covering in this video: advance notice, requested speed, benchmarks, and expectation shifts. Advance notice. A project that needs to be completed quickly can be stressful, especially if it wasn't known about until the day before. As an example, our team typically books out about 3 to 4 weeks in advance. The more advance notice there is about a project, the more likely we can take it on without expedited fees. Notifying your editor early also allows you to leverage them as a sounding board to communicate details with the production team, review storyboards and concepts, and ultimately help ensure a smooth process and happy client. Requested speed. Again, using ourselves as an example, our standard first cut turnaround commonly falls within 1 to 2 weeks from the time of media arrival, at least at the time of shooting this video. When the turnaround date is flexible, We typically only provide first cut turnaround estimations, not final completion dates. That's mainly due to the fact that once we pass the ball to an agency or the end client for feedback, we have no control over the amount of time it takes to get a response. In other circumstances, our clients come to us with a prepared post-production timeline that includes draft dates and benchmarks for feedback. We'll review the proposed timeline and, based on the complexity of the project and our availability at the time, see how the budget is affected. As an all-employee-based team, overtime costs in California are a very real thing. So if a quicker turnaround is needed than we can provide within normal business hours, we'll add on an expedited fee. Benchmarks. Once a post-production timeline has been set, straying from established benchmarks can affect the overall turnaround of the project. If the final due date is firm, but other parties miss their deadlines, it's usually the post-production team's feet that are held to the fire. Don't be surprised if deadline delays outside of your editor's control result in expedited fees being applied to the remaining phases of the project. Depending on how many revision rounds or services are affected, like color grading, audio mixing, and motion graphics, the expedited costs may start to increase if the original scope isn't adjusted. And finally, expectation shifts. Pre-production is the ideal time to align all teams and stakeholders around the core vision for a project. Tools such as storyboards and scripts help conceptualize details that guide production and post-production alike. If there are mid-project shifts based on either a client's change of heart or unideal execution during production, post-production will likely need to reevaluate if the original budget can still support the new circumstances. Stack this with a fixed final due date, and costs can start to add up quickly as the rules of engagement change while the deadline remains the same. I hope that shedding light on the factors that drive post-production time and cost helps set you up for success in creating a budget for your next video project. Making sure you understand how factors such as scope, style, and turnaround affect your post-production team is important. It'll help set realistic budgets and avoid potential overages. Communicating with your post-production team early will help align everyone in the process about what's possible within the available budget before setting client expectations and committing to a specific end product. For more details on how to allocate budgets or to consult about your specific project's needs, feel free to reach out. As always, please make sure to like and subscribe for more post-production insights. Until next time.